All right, so I wanted to talk about the Oroville Dam, and I don't know, I know there's a lot of people within the truth community that feel as though this is being done intentionally to move people out of that region in California. I haven't done much research on this myself, but it is about another topic in terms of this flooding that I want to talk about. So I was getting my hair cut today, and the guy had Fox News on, and they were covering the Oroville Dam, and another older gentleman came into the barber shop, and the three of us talked about dams breaking and flooding because all of us have experienced this. Many people on this YouTube channel know that I was living in Chennai, India about 2 years ago when they had that great flood that flooded about 4/5 of the city, and my flat was under about 3 feet of water. And both the barber and the other gentleman had stories of being around flooding and or dams that are breaking. Many of the dams that are around America have water in them and are cracked and leaking, and people don't know about it. And so this is a huge concern because I wanted to talk about this anyway. And you have to evaluate the region in which you live. One of the first things to know when you're in a system that's collapsing, that the infrastructure of your system's collapsing, your economy is collapsing, the moral degradation, the human being are collapsing and having psychological issues. And you can see that there's a decline of your civilization. This happens to all great empires, and it's happening here in America. And how much longer the infrastructure and the system that we're 100% dependent on is kept afloat, nobody really knows. But it could go at any moment. And you have to evaluate where you're living to understand that when there is a collapse, and I've talked about this, there's three major possibilities here: a collapse of the economic system, a collapse of the energy system, or a collapse of the food system. When a collapse of one will lead to a collapse of the other two. And so and even a partial collapse and some infrastructure, those people who live around that dam area, the people who are in the floodplain by the Oroville Dam. We saw this in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. If you live in a place that is being upheld by the system, that there's no way that anybody could survive where you live if the system wasn't in existence, then you have to think about that and think about a sort of plan, because as soon as there is a collapse, you're going to have to move. And moving and being something where you have to grab things and run is one of the worst positions you can be in, probably the worst position, because you're basically not taking very much with you. Your money probably won't have value if there's a worldwide collapse. I mean, you're basically homeless with very little, and most likely you're going to end up in a FEMA camp situation, which is probably the worst possibility for anybody. And we've seen this happen when countries' economies collapse, or there's these just whatever, war and these things. Refugees always suffer the worst. And you look at the way refugees are considered. I mean, this immigration ban, people are not liking these refugees that are leaving the war-torn area in the Middle East. So being a refugee is kind of a horrible situation to be in. And many of the places that you live that are inhabited in America, without this structure, without the system, like it's too cold in some places, and without a heating system and a way to clear the roads, there's just not a long enough growing season, and it's very hard to procure food and these types of things, water. If you live in a floodplain and that you have dams and things like this that are eventually going to collapse, well, that's a horrible situation because you're going to be flooded out and you're going to be in a crisis situation with very little. Being in a flood is probably the worst. You live in the desert where water is pumped into your house from some reservoir, probably based in some dam. Again, this is an area where it's going to be a lot of fires. It's probably too hot to live there without air conditioning, and without water, you're going to be driven out. And there's a lot of places in America, a lot of cities have been built in areas that nobody would live. The Native Americans didn't live there. They're just not places where you can grow food. There's no water, it's too hot, it's too dry, it's whatever. And so you have to evaluate your living situation based in this idea if there was a collapse, how long could you hold up there? And without fresh water, the answer is not very long. Ideally, you would like a place with a spring water that you can drink. It's clean, it's fresh, beautiful water coming from the ground. If you had a situation like that, that's probably 50% of your survival. You can use that water to grow food as well, and it just comes flying out of the ground. I mean, springs are a beautiful thing. And there's places in America. America has a lot of fresh water. But living around some freshwater system and having the ability to purify it is about half your battle, because water is basically a big part of survival. And then you can probably make do with everything else. Even if it's too cold or too hot, you can find a way to survive, especially if you have water. You can find a way to use that water to help you keep cool. Your body temperature and water are two of the major things. If you live in a place where it's just so hot that you can't live without air conditioning, then you're going to be driven out by the heat as soon as summer rolls around. And so in these places in the West, you have long places to drive. The other thing that's important to know is that the majority of concrete, the majority of cement that's been used, bonds for about 100 years. And then the bonds start to break apart. Just like when you glue something, the bonds of the glue, the chemical structure of the glue will bond for a long period of time, and then it'll eventually dry out and start breaking apart. And that's happening in our infrastructure. Most cities are over 100 years old. Concrete is starting to break apart. It's just too expensive. It'd be easier to trash all the cities and rebuild them, but that's just not going to happen. So this is another reason that you're going to see a collapse coming, because the infrastructure is just going to start falling apart based in how concrete works. So it's a good idea to take this Oroville situation and what happened in New Orleans and things as our future, because these things are going to continuously happen, and maybe there'll be a complete meltdown at some point where there'll be a collective breakdown. And then you have to start evaluating your situation and what you need specifically to last as long as you can in your house or wherever you live, because that's the best case scenario. And if you can find a way to get water and you can keep your place dry, flooding is horrible, because then the mold sets in and basically you're living in a very toxic environment. But if you can keep your place dry and you have some sort of water, preferably some sort of clean water like a creek, and a spring would be ideal. And that's one big portion of your issues. And then you have to figure out how to heat or cool your home and food and these types of things. But with some of these basic items, you can last a very long time. And so these are some thoughts about this. I think that everyone needs to basically start considering this. Just evaluate your situation. And then where would you go if you did go? What would you take with you? How long? How far can you get on a tank of gas? Keeping your car full of gas is important. Maybe having some spare gas in a can in your garage or whatever, if you have something like that, storage area, so that you can make it. Some of these places in the West, you can drive for days before getting to a place that would be inhabitable. And then what do you have? Do you have tents? What do you have for your living situation once you have to hit the road? So these things are something everyone needs to take a look at and evaluate. Again, I'm going to make a bunch of videos about this, but I think this Oroville Dam should be a wake-up call, because there are people who live in floodplains. There are people who live in dangerous situations, and with the blink of an eye, you could be homeless and in this type of situation. All right, this is Paul Romano reporting from the apocalypse. Everybody have a blessed day.